You're going to the Wisconsin Book Festival's fall celebration, right? It's our state's premier library event of the year, and it's coming up next month, October 23rd through the 26th. It's a public opportunity with more than 55 events where you can connect with authors and fellow book lovers at Madison's Central Library and other downtown venues. It's accessible to everyone, and yes, there are even sometimes free book giveaways with signed copies available from renowned authors. Don't forget, the festival also hosts author programming all year round. So what are you waiting for? Go find the complete schedule at wisconsinbookfestival.org. Ready to cozy up your space this fall? Wisco Home Goods has just what you need. Hand-poured soy candles crafted in small batches, made to burn clean, and scented with the warm, comforting notes of the season. Stop by their shop at 4664 Cottage Grove Road on Madison's beautiful east side, or browse their fall collection online at wiscohomegoods.com. Shop local, breathe easy, feel good. All autumn long with Wisco Home Goods. This is CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Today, one of Madison's most popular streets, Williamson Street, aka Willy Street, is going through a new and, at the moment, temporary change. The city has closed down the rush hour traffic lanes on Willy, so it's now a one-lane street in both directions in an attempt to reduce speeding and car crashes. With me now to discuss is Mike Tarby, co-chair of the Marquette Neighborhood Association Transportation and Safety Committee, which covers the Willy Street area. Mike, thank you so much for making the time.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks so much for inviting us to have this conversation.
Oh, absolutely. I also want to say that I've asked you out there listening on the pod and online for your thoughts on this test. A lot of feedback came in, so I'll be sharing some of that here. Also, check your inbox for today's newsletter companion piece because a lot came in and we can't cover it all. So, yeah, Mike, before we get into the specifics of the new experiment, I understand some traffic intervention on Willy Street has been knocking on the door for years. What was the need like for some kind of intervention on Willy?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's a very popular street in Madison. It's a major throughway to and from downtown. So there's a lot happening in the area, and there are lots of people that use that space that move through it. And the majority of those people aren't using this space for their cars or by means of their cars. And when you have a space that's been historically sort of catering to private vehicle transportation, and, when we have these rush hour lanes that, as we saw from, a speed study that one of our neighbors had performed on the street, the traffic in the rush hour lane was moving faster than the interlane traffic, although both were already above the speed limit on average. So when we see like that kind of behavior on the street, that doesn't make it a particularly comfortable place for people walking, people biking, or even the more cautious drivers that, maybe you're turning onto the street and, you're looking to the left and cars are flying past you at 40 miles an hour. So it's been important for a long time that this space is sort of transitioning into one that's more oriented to people that are living in the area, that are trying to, go to those businesses or just want to, sort of enjoy the space in a more comfortable setting.
Yeah, I have to say anecdotally, and I'm sure many people who have driven on Willy or even are walking could see, I was like, what is going on? Why is everyone going so much faster than me in the right lane? Like something is broken here. So I can't say that I'm surprised that the city's taking some action on this. I do want to give a little bit more context around sort of what brought Willy Street to this situation and the city putting the test forward. So businesses including Mother Fool's Coffee House, Halong Bay, Batch Bakehouse, Willy Street Treasure Shop, and Change Boutique have all experienced crashes. I've got some data to share. Madison City Traffic Engineering Department, who tracks accidents and analyzes crash data, said that in the past 5 years, there have been 122 crashes on Willy. The past 5 years. So that both sounds like a lot, and it is for that kind of roadway, according to that department. Assistant Director Tom Ward told Isthmus that Willy Street as a road is more comparable to Monroe Street, which had only 46 crashes over that same period. So well over double there. And, there's a lot of numbers, but there have been 9 cars who have hit or crashed into storefronts or buildings on Willy since 2016. So there was a need for something to happen, right?
I'm glad that you drew that comparison between Willy Street and Monroe Street. When we met with Tom Moore and the city in June, shortly following the Mother Fool's collision, that was kind of one of our primary questions was, hey, why does Willy Street feel so much less safe than Monroe Street? And like, what are the discrepancies between these two areas? And part of it had to do with cross streets, and there are a lot more four-way intersections on Willy Street than there are on Monroe. But aside from that, they couldn't really point to like, yeah, there's this one, intersection that's really problematic, or, visibility is difficult at a certain part of the street. Really, the only shared factor across all of those instances over the past 5 years is that they were on Willy Street. And so that kind of made us take a step back in a way and say, okay, so it's the street more broadly that's the problem. We're not looking at like a particular issue. So what can we do on that street-wide sort of scale that can help address that problem? And I've heard a lot of folks mention that, there was only one building collision that happened during the rush hour window. So why are we closing the rush hour lanes if the majority of those building collisions happened outside of the rush hour window? I think that's a great point to bring up. Obviously, our focus isn't limited to building collisions. I think more broadly, we're trying to create a more comfortable environment for everybody that uses the area. And so when we take measures like closing the rush hour lanes, we're sort of sending a message that, hey, this is a quieter street. We want people to enjoy their time here. This isn't just like, an arterial or a commuter throughway. We want people to stop and spend time and, enjoy the space. And, part of that isn't just reducing collisions, be them with buildings or with other vehicles, but also just a sense of comfort and, ease and not having such a high stress, area.
I'm so glad that you brought that up top, because a lot of people are mentioning that. And we even mentioned it, or Rob Thomas talked about that on our Friday News Roundup about like, yeah, I'm not sure how much impact this is going to have. But if you actually widen the scope of what you're trying to accomplish, it makes a little bit more sense. And also removing rush hour lanes to make it less rushed. There isn't really a hope from people, what I'm hearing, to have a rushed Willy Street for people who actually live there. I want to give a little context about what this test is, right? So this is a brand new traffic test for Willy. I'm going to just outline what the city detailed in their release about the test. So these are the parameters of the test. Williamson Street will allow one lane of traffic in both directions at all times. On-street parking will remain available at all times on both sides of the street. A new Thursday parking restriction will be implemented to allow for trash and recycling collection and other maintenance such as brush and leaf collection, street sweeping. That's typically been performed during the peak hour parking restrictions, and parking will be restricted further back from intersections. So places like Mother Fool's to allow through traffic to bypass left-turning vehicles during peak hours. Mike, I understand the Marquette Neighborhood Association Transportation and Safety Committee helped drive the effort to get this test implemented. Why recommend making this intervention specifically, closing down the rush hour lanes? Like, what's the logic there?
Our focus, not just for this particular issue, but just with anything that the Neighborhood Association approaches, is what's the way that we can make the most direct and immediate change? A lot of issues are out of the hands of us or other neighborhood associations in the city. So when we are approaching an issue, we look at opportunities where we can have the most impact. And more often than not, we're looking for places where that change can happen more quickly. There are a lot of processes in the city which, rightfully go through a thorough review process and tend to take, a little bit longer. And so that change, in the meantime, not much is happening. And, that issue persists while we wait for those longer processes to conclude. So this was an opportunity for us to say, hey, these signs, maybe we can just cover them up. Maybe we can take them down. But it seems like a change that's relatively quick and easy to implement. This is low cost. It's, very reversible too. Like we can just put the signs back up. We saw that, there was harm in terms of, the perceived comfort on the street from the rush hour lanes with that difference in average traffic speeds. So it seemed like kind of low-hanging fruit and a great thing for the neighborhood association to advocate for.
You don't want people rushing here, but you want something done because there have been this series of crashes and an increase of people not feeling like it's a safe place to recreate and all the things that people also know and love about Willy Street. You mentioned it was also particularly low cost. The city has said the test is estimated to cost the city around $24,000. In terms of the timeline, it's for roughly about a month, a little bit more. The city's traffic engineering site also posted the test timeline to be between Tuesday, September 9th, so it's already kicked off, and run through Friday, October 24th, so a little over a month. What is the city hoping to accomplish in this period? And do we know what kinds of data they're looking to collect?
We do. So the city is going to be looking at traffic volumes, traffic speeds, not just on Willy Street, but also on Jennifer Street, which was one of the concerns raised by residents. If traffic flow through Williamson is slower, are folks going to be diverted onto, quieter neighborhood streets? And so that's something that we want the city to pay attention to as well. And I think ideally, if this were to be implemented long term, we'd see some traffic calming measures on those adjacent streets as well. They're also already monitoring traffic on East Washington and some crossings over the Yahara River as well, so they can get a good sense of where people are turning off and entering the neighborhood. But one thing that I think is really important, so the city has put out a survey. They have a website that is detailing the project, and there's a survey for folks to share their thoughts and experiences. And I think the city's goal with that is to collect a lot of that sort of more subjective information. Of course, we could look at the number of traffic collisions that happen on Willy Street, but those aren't really frequent enough data points, luckily, to track over the course of a month and be able to determine if it's, if this change in particular had contributed to a decrease in collisions. So one thing that I think is important to consider alongside speed and volume is comfort and how people feel using the street. And so I think the survey is going to be a really important factor in that. So I encourage folks who, are driving, walking, biking, busing through the neighborhood to share the experience, let the city know what it felt like before, what it feels like now. I think that's going to be really crucial to what steps we take after this trial concludes.
Absolutely. And just from anecdotal experience here on CityCast Madison, we've received a lot of feedback about the test already. So for folks who do live around and on Williamson Street, being a part of this test, like how you're feeling, writing, sharing your feedback in that survey will be huge. So I know that we're going to get into some more solutions in a moment. I do want to ask, though, the Madison Transportation Committee voted unanimously to approve this test at the end of August. It's happening, whether, people have their opinions on it, which we'll get to. Was there unanimous backing from the Marquette Neighborhood Transportation Committee? And, what did the neighborhood have to say?
Yeah, so I had mentioned we had a community meeting in June following the initial Mother Fools crash. That was when we had conversations with the city, with traffic engineering, the alder for District 6 in that neighborhood, Davey Mayer, was in attendance as well. And we had probably another 24 or so community members that were crammed into a relatively small room. We don't usually have great attendance at the traffic and safety committee, but we're thrilled to see that so many people, were interested in the issue, and everybody wanted to see something done. They knew that Willy Street was not as comfortable as they'd like it to be. And especially for folks that live in the neighborhood, like regardless of what part of Madison or what part of the country you live in, you want your street to be a safe place. You chose to live there for a reason, and you want to feel comfortable in that environment. So people were asking us to take action. We thought of this proposal at the committee level. We took it to the board. The board agreed and approved writing a letter to Transportation Commission, and that's how this was all sort of kicked off.
In preparation for this conversation, I went over to Willy Street and caught up with the co-owner of Mother Fools Coffee House, John Hain. Mother Fools is the latest victim of a full-blown car crash into their storefront on Willy. That was this past May. So I just ran into the owner of Mother Fools, John Hain. He's right here, and I'm just asking, what do you think about closing the rush hour lanes?
I think it's a great idea. I'm looking forward to the study, and I hope it shows what I suspect it will, that people will drive slower. Some people are going to choose to go out to East Wash. And I just can't wait to see. I'm glad the city's finally moving forward with it. It's been a long time coming.
Thank you, John. So this is the third time Mother Fools has had a car crash into them this May, but also back in 2016 in a pretty major way, and a lesser crash back in 2010. When I ran into John, it's just a neighborly street, as one does. It was not planned at all. He told me that pre-crash, they were projecting this year to be their best business year to date. So they were thriving, and that said, he's still optimistic that they're going to hit that milestone, but there's a lot of catch up. There's a lot of costs to this dangerous driving. Mm-hmm. Mike, how has the status quo of driving culture on Willy impacted the business scene, and what have you heard from business owners?
A piece of feedback that we've received from business owners in the area, and there's actually been a recently formed business alliance to help sort of facilitate that conversation with the neighborhood association as well, is that they want to promote foot traffic. When you're a business, especially the types of industries that we see on Willy Street, a lot of cafes, shops, bars, it's not really things that you require cars to get to. And, more often than not, they're the types of shops where the owners want people to be walking by, look into the window and say, oh, that's interesting, and, pop into the store and hopefully buy something or, take a seat. So they're eager for these sorts of opportunities to encourage more people to walk through the neighborhood and feel comfortable just going up and down Willy Street. I've mentioned in, some meetings and in other conversations with residents that I don't feel comfortable biking along Willy Street myself, so I'll pop up onto Jennifer, go down however many blocks and then cut back onto Willy for whatever block I need to. And that's not promoting foot traffic, certainly. It's not encouraging people to just, use the full length of the street and appreciate everything that's there.
This past weekend, I was having brunch at my favorite spot, Willoughby's, a longtime Madison business on Willy Street. And I thought, hey, let's take a stroll down Willy, and actually just decided I'm going to go on the bike path and walk there because it felt more serene, because there is something about the 4 lanes of traffic that maybe isn't the most inviting place to have all of this sort of be leisurely, be cute and sweet and check out these vintage things, and also be careful because there's a car, and that's on the weekend. So, there's not even the morning commute at that time. I do want to get to some feedback from you out there listening that came into our inbox. So one message in our inbox is from Wayne H. saying, quote, I think the cause of crashes into the coffee shop are due to drivers heading east that are passing to the right of a vehicle, waiting to turn left while a vehicle heading west causes the eastbound vehicle to swerve into the coffee shop. I also want to say, this whole conversation isn't just about Mother Fool's Coffee House, right? And we also received some feedback about that. However, it has been hit 3 times, right? So it's very relevant for that purpose. And something that Wayne is sharing, I think, is at the center of this. Mother Fool's co-owner said that was part of the reason for the latest crash, someone trying to get around a car during rush hour. So how much of this conversation and this test is around turning and folks trying to get around cars? Yeah,
that's something that the city's traffic engineering was very conscious of. So they, the plan that they put together, as you mentioned, they're widening the no parking zone right before intersections. So that should give folks a little bit more room, a little bit more visibility so that they can feel more comfortable and see any oncoming traffic. If you're trying to turn around a car that's making a left and somebody's trying to make a left off of Willy Street at that same intersection, hopefully with those cars not parked along the side, you should have a little bit more time to, react, to see that other car. But I think that's a worthwhile point to, bring into future conversations as well. We're not at the point where Williamson Street is going to be reconstructed in the near future. It'll at the very least be, 10, 15, probably more like 20 years away. So we're looking at things that can be implemented now that are low cost. We know the city isn't sitting on stacks and stacks of money. We just had the referendum this past year. So we're conscious of those, restrictions too, but I think it's something that we should look at going forward. And I'm going to be hitting you with a number of people's reactions and feedback that we got in.
Danny G wrote and said, quote, honestly, the removal of rush hour lanes on Willy Street is coming several years too late. As is, Willy Street feels inappropriately auto-centric. The fact that the city has thus far treated it like a thoroughfare when the monstrosity, aka East Wash, runs parallel to it, that's always puzzled me. We got another message in from Janet M., who wrote, quote, I'm thrilled the city is going to discourage commuters from using Willy Street as an east-west thoroughfare. Years ago, I stopped using Willy Street as a through street and instead use East Washington if I have to drive. Willy Street will be much improved when not choked with cars. So we have plenty of positive feedback about this and folks kind of looking to East Washington. There's obviously some congestion happening on the isthmus, right? That's something that we're all reckoning with.
There is. And I think an important point to call out is that the neighborhood association and the community, I don't think is trying to discourage commuters from using Williamson Street. We just want people to use it at 25 miles per hour or less. That's the posted speed limit on the street. We want folks to be traveling at safe speeds. But it is worthwhile to note, and this was also shared by traffic engineering, that East Washington is about at 50% vehicle capacity. So we have the space on the east side of the Capitol for more traffic into and out of the city. It's also worthwhile noting when you're traveling eastbound, turning off of John Nolan, there's only one lane that turns onto Williamson Street. And as it is right now, even with the 2 rush hour lanes open, that lane's pretty often backed up to Monona Terrace there. So there really isn't more capacity for vehicles to enter the street right now. So the bottleneck isn't necessarily the rush hour lanes. It usually comes prior to that at that intersection with John Nolan. But it's also worthwhile to point out that the new bus rapid transit that just opened up along East Washington and the Capital City bike path and these other streets like East Johnson and Gorham provide a variety of options and opportunities for getting people into and out of downtown. And I don't think the solution to our congestion is adding more lanes or maintaining necessarily the lanes that we have. There's this concept of induced demand that you'll hear, tossed around in some transportation interested groups. And the idea is that if you build the lanes, they'll come. If you take away lanes, people will figure it out. People's schedules accommodate. Maybe you allow a couple more minutes in the morning for your commute. But I think the goal sort of more broadly, and we've seen this a lot from the city, is encouraging alternative modes of transportation that are not just more accessible, but also lower cost. At the same time, we've got these environmental goals that the city is trying to, contribute to and trying to meet. So private vehicle transportation is not the way to solve the environment crisis, if that's something that you're passionate about. So there's a lot of facets to transportation, and I don't think that removing a lane from Williamson will be as negatively impactful as some folks are concerned about.
Yeah, so everyone get on the bus. No, you're not saying everyone. I will say I've heard the idea of these Madison hippies, they want us to get rid of our cars, and don't they know that some of us commute outside of the city and need our, pickup trucks or that sort of thing? I don't know how many of you listening on this podcast feel that way, but I personally have someone in my life who thinks that way. So, it's a yes and being considerate of all the goals and people's needs, diversity of needs is important. While we're talking about pushback, have you heard pushback to the test? And if so, along what lines? What are people concerned about?
Yeah, primarily the pushback has been longer commute times for folks that use Williamson. My guess is that especially for a lot of traffic coming from the north or east side of Madison or Monona area, if you're using East Washington instead, probably only adding a minute or two to your commute. And, like we said, the traffic volume on Willy Street isn't expected to change a ton because of bottlenecks that exist before and after the road. So even if you use Willy Street, it might be a similar, 1 to 2 minute difference. And I hope that folks are able to prioritize the safety of people on the street over that difference in commute time. But another significant concern was traffic being diverted onto neighborhood streets. So I'm hoping that the city continues to look at traffic calming measures on Jennifer Street, on Spate Street, on East Main Street, and try to slow traffic in those areas too. I don't think it's unreasonable to suspect that some cars will skirt off to those side streets and try to get around any congestion that might pop up on Williamson. So those have been two of the more significant concerns that I've heard.
Yeah, it does feel like there's a tension between residents and business owners of Willy and those who use Willy as their commute. It seems to be an established sort of tension here. Something you mentioned earlier in the conversation, Mike, you don't feel comfortable biking on Williamson Street. We have gotten pushback in our inbox, including someone, really concerned about these lanes going away and what's going to happen with the bikers.
Hi there. My name is Lori, and I regularly commute down Willy Street to go home at night, and I cannot imagine going back to not having the fast lane. It's been so much more convenient when you get stuck behind somebody that's trying to make a left-hand turn when you are heading towards Obrick Park. You could be there for a very long time, and the bikers just do whatever the hell they want, let's face it. So it can really be a mess. I really think that if we go back to taking away both lanes and allowing parking again, that biking should be restricted. It's just too much of a cluster. It's too dangerous.
Mike, do you have any thoughts about what Lori said?
Yeah, there are still options in the area for folks that are more risk averse, and I don't expect from this change everyone who takes a bike through the Marquette neighborhood to move on to Williamson Street. I don't think that's a realistic expectation, nor do I think that's what we want necessarily, but I'm not going to speak on behalf of the neighborhood association. I'd love to see some on-street bike facilities on Williamson. It'd be great to see a separated lane or a protected lane. One of the other concerns from folks is that when there are vehicles parked along the side of a street and you're biking alongside them, you're in what's called the door zone. And, you're sort of faced with the choice of, do I want to drift closer to a travel lane where cars are going by me, hopefully at the speed limit? Or do I want to be closer to parked cars? And is there someone that just parked and maybe they don't see me coming up behind them and I'm going to be hit with the door? So it's certainly not the ideal biking environment, but I think this is a step in the right direction and provides some more opportunities in the future for what we might want to do with those lanes.
Yeah, another message was from Irene O., who wrote in part, quote, I personally appreciate the Willy Street rush hour lanes and have used them when not commuting on my bike on Jennifer or Spate Street. I'm concerned about the effect this will have on residential streets off of Willy when lots of drivers will choose to race through the neighborhood to beat the Willy Street single lane backup. That's what you've been talking about. You've referenced that concern and you've referenced that there will be additional data collected. Is there anything else you would say in response to Irene's concerns?
If you're thinking about cutting onto Jennifer, I wouldn't encourage it. We've reached out to the Madison Police Department to implement some temporary enforcement on Jennifer to try and proactively counteract folks that might choose to speed along that street. There are a lot of families in that area, so I hope that folks stay conscious of that. But there are steps that the city can and should take to calm traffic on that street. We've had conversations with Tom Moore about, could we put planters, going into intersections that are sort of a visual indicator for folks to slow down and, also protect folks in a crosswalk. It's not going to stop a car, but, if I were driving down a street, I wouldn't want my car to hit a planter. So things like that are also still friendly to people biking or busing through the neighborhood. That's an important consideration as well. Jennifer is a bus route too, so we can't look at speed bumps. We can't put in too many stop signs. So we have to sort of explore those other measures that can calm vehicle speeds, but still keep it a friendly environment for those other modes of transportation.
Yeah. Mario left a voicemail in our inbox about potential solutions and just some big picture thoughts. Let's hear from him.
So I think the test is really about, can we make improvements to Williamson Street, not about whether removing the peak hour lanes itself will fix the issue. Because really what will reduce speeds on Willy Street is adding bump outs, reducing the width of the road, and reducing that field of vision so the drivers feel like they need to go slower, improving walkability, improving crossings. And none of those things can happen right now because we need all this space for those peak hour lanes. And so if it is determined in the test that we don't actually need the peak hour lanes, then we will be able to make significant, real safety improvements to Willy Street. And that's what's so exciting about the test. If it goes well, then we will actually be able to make a dent in the future on Willy Street. It's really a long-term thing. I don't think removing the peak hour lanes just by itself will do that much, but it will be a first step towards something truly transformative for all the businesses and everybody who uses Willy Street.
Well, hear ye. That's a lot of what you've been saying, right, Mike?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is just a step. This isn't a silver bullet solution, and it's just a trial. This isn't permanent, so we'll see how it works. Maybe this doesn't work and we go back to the drawing board, and that's fine. I think it's important that we get more comfortable as a community and as a city with these sorts of low-cost, quick to implement, easy to reverse measures that let us know, is this something that we should explore, once a street reconstruction comes along, or is this really not a contributing factor and we should look at, as the listener mentioned, curb bump outs, maybe raised pedestrian crossings or something like that. But again, just a step in the right direction and hopefully opening up some more doors down the road.
Yeah, I know T. Sider wrote on our Instagram that we need high-speed rail, but we won't. That's a whole episode. and Mike, has your neighborhood association or the city considered any other interventions that are worth mentioning?
Yeah, the city did consider installing bollards at the intersections. Bollards are typically concrete or metal pillars that are installed, into the ground that are meant to prevent cars that might veer off the road. And typically those are rated to stop vehicles, I think, traveling like 25 to 30 miles per hour. And those were quoted to be about $5,000 per bollard. And, by the city's estimate, for them to be effective in an intersection, you'd want 3 at each corner. And there's 4 corners to most of these intersections. So we're looking at $60,000 per intersection, of which there are 10 on Williamson. So $60,000 is a whole lot more than a $24,000 lane removal study.
Yeah. There was a part 2 to Irene O's message, which was a recommendation I'll just share, that she's never seen traffic patrols on Willy or seen anyone pulled over, and certainly not during rush hour. That might be a place to start from. Did that ever come up in the discussion?
We've been, I think, hesitant and a bit averse to enforcement as a long-term solution. I think because it's not, right? Like when you have a squad car on a street, it might slow traffic down for that time period in those few blocks before and after. But as soon as that car's gone, the effect fades pretty quickly. So unless you're asking the city to have a police officer stationed on Williamson 24/7, so folks know, oh, I can't speed on Willy, there's a cop here, it's really not a long-term solution. And so we want to look for more systemic changes to the street that can make the environment safer. And also, that's, I don't think, a particularly cost-effective measure either. You're paying for police time that could be used for other more pressing issues when we can change this through, design.
I super appreciate you coming and bringing your expertise and the neighborhood perspective on this issue impacting the Willy Street neighborhood, the Marquette neighborhood. Before I let you go, what will you be looking out for in terms of success of this pilot?
I'll be looking for more people walking on Willy. I'm certainly going to keep track of those survey responses. Hopefully the city posts the total count and they do often post the responses themselves. So I'm sure I'll take an afternoon sometime and read through those once they get released. But, a lot of our neighborhood association members are interested in talking with folks, not just in the area in Marquette, but, across the city, and really understanding, was this the right thing for us to push for? Was this a positive overall impact on folks' experience with the street? And I hope the answer is yes.
Well, Mike, thanks for coming on CityCast Madison.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's Mike Tarby, co-chair of the Marquette Neighborhood Association's Transportation and Safety Committee. If you want to share feedback to the city about this test, as discussed, the city is encouraging that, as well as the Marquette Neighborhood Association. The city has an online questionnaire, which is linked in our episode show note. So go give feedback. If you have feelings, if you have thoughts, share them. That's all for today here on CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, your host. Don't forget, you can support this show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Madison neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. And if you enjoyed the show, why not share this episode with someone who cares whether or not you turn left on Willy Street? All right, we'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Until then, take good care. When I heard bollards, I heard bollard, shakala, 20 grams. So not those. Glad for the clarification.